Hi, my name is Sandy Carter. I'm Amazon Web Services Vice President of Enterprise Workloads, and welcome today to our virtual transformation keynote. We have so many exciting things to talk to you about, from getting started with culture and transformation, as well as looking at things like how do you migrate some applications, how do you do modernization with things like AI, and even looking at how you put it all together to really transform your business. A little bit of background about myself. Before I came to Amazon, I've been here for about 2 years. I ran a startup in Silicon Valley called Silicon Blitz, and we focused on innovation and culture. Before that, I worked on the Watson ecosystem team with IBM and really looked at how you could innovate using artificial intelligence and the cloud. So I am really excited today to share some of those learnings around transformation. Now, before I come over to the studio to film this today, I was walking on the streets of Seattle and I saw a bottle. So I reached down and I picked it up and I rubbed it and out popped a genie. And the genie said, Sandy, not only is this your special day because you get to film Transformation Day, but also you get 3 wishes. However, whatever you wish for, your evil arch enemy gets double. So I thought about it for a moment and I said, okay. So first I wished for a beautiful house on the beach, because who doesn't want a house on the beach? And I got one, but poof, my evil arch enemy got 2. Then I wished for a red Tesla, because I've always wanted a red Tesla, but my evil arch enemy got 2. For my final wish, I said, Genie, scare me half to death. Now, what does that have to do with our session today? Well, I am not going to scare you half to death, but I do have 3 wishes as takeaways for this session. The first, I want to talk to you about change and have you know that change is the new norm. Secondly, I want to talk to you a little bit about innovation and transformation and what are the elements that make that successful. And then finally, I'm going to have you see it in action. We're going to give you some examples so that you can see this is not just theory, this is real world action. So let's go ahead and get started with that first area around change. So if you think about it, so many companies today are faced with this very dynamic environment. We're going to see customer expectations change and fluctuate. In fact, customers will change their mind, and that's why you've got to be on the ball with product management, constantly developing that new roadmap. There are also so many low barriers to entry. In fact, a report I just read showed that because of the cloud, now companies are not spending 80% of their funding as a startup on hardware and software. They're able to spend that 80% on that true subject matter expertise, which really creates all that disruption. And then, of course, just because change is occurring at an ever faster rate, I have 2 daughters, and I constantly read them books. And so one is Alice in Wonderland. And I love the section where Alice said, I have to run twice as fast just to stay in place. And that's what it feels like today with all the change that is occurring in the marketplace. And so as we're looking at all this change and what enterprises are challenged with, we're seeing that businesses are looking to not have that slow delivery anymore, but to really speed that time to market. The speed is really crucial, and the way that you deliver that with high quality is really important. We're also seeing a whole area around how you look at the effort that you spend and looking at some of the wrong areas versus doing rapid integration, rapid migration, rapid decision making to really make sure that you're keeping up with the change that is occurring in the marketplace. And then who hasn't seen this one? We see a lot of silos and gatekeepers slowing you down versus how do you get collaboration across an enterprise, which really makes a difference as you're innovating in the marketplace. As you're looking at that rate and pace of change, how do you continue to focus on the customer experience? Gartner has said that the customer experience is the last form of true competitive advantage. So how do you make sure that your focus is there and not just on the rate of change or what's going on around you? And then finally, how you look at those processes and how you look at that nimbleness in the marketplace that's coupled with the technology, how you're looking at that legacy versus that constant innovation. So with these challenges, some of the things that you're seeing on the right is really what startups do today. They move quickly, they collaborate, they have that intrinsic sense of what's happening next. But enterprises also have a lot of really cool advantages. In fact, when I ran my startup, there were some of these I was like, wow, if I only had access or permission to some of that data that enterprises have, or if I had access to the resources and even those business processes that, can sometimes slow you down. Those business processes also add a lot in getting things done. So there are some phenomenal advantages that you have as a large company. And the trick or the goal here is to make sure that you're leveraging those and the permissions that you have while also acting like a startup. And if you can combine the both of those together, then you have some true transformation that's happening in your particular business as well. And that's really what we're seeing. We see that all successful companies have innovation in their DNA. And the ability to innovate, isn't new, right? I mean, Ford started by innovating the car. GE started by innovating the light bulb. So if you think about it, even your company has innovation in your DNA. The question is, how do you accelerate that innovation? How do you get that innovation to yield some projects that have true value for your customer set that's in the market today? And when you think about that, what you really need to think about is how do you unblock that innovation, taking advantage of all those strengths that you have that we talked about, permission to customer sets, access to funding, business processes. So how do you make sure that you've got that right culture that will unblock innovation for your teams today, but you make the most of all those strengths that you also have in the marketplace? So as you think about that, everybody says that change is hard. Most people, I know there are a few, but most people are not in love with change. But as you're looking at it, what are some of those things that typically stand in the way? One is those processes. Like I said, they can be a strength and they can be a weakness. If they are too established and inflexible, you really can't disrupt. The second one, which I hear about a lot, is cultural resistance. In fact, my favorite saying is, culture eats strategy for lunch, meaning that if you don't have the right culture, you're not going to be able to move your strategy. When I lived in Silicon Valley, I saw a lot of companies and countries send people to the valley to learn about what innovation is. And the sad thing was that they would learn about how Silicon Valley did it, but then they took it back to their home country or their home company, and it would fail because they did not match their strategy to their culture. And then finally, which we'll also be talking about today, is that existing infrastructure. Some call it legacy. Could be like those old Microsoft applications that you have in your infrastructure, or Oracle, or SAP, or. But how do you leverage that existing infrastructure to help you really drive that change and drive that disruption? So we're going to touch on each of these today as we go through the half-day session for our virtual transformation day. So we're going to start out by first making sure that everybody knows that this is really an organization challenge. When we talk about those business processes and we talk about the way that culture is so important, those two elements are essential, but you also have to have the technology. You have to leverage that existing infrastructure that you have behind powering that organization. So this is really going to be a discussion about the organization challenge with the embedded technology challenge. And you'll hear that flow throughout our day today. Now, given that technology is there, cloud is really our enabler. It's really not a question of if you're going to the cloud, but when you're going to go to the cloud, how much you're going to go to the cloud, and what does that pattern look like? I do believe that cloud helps you to move faster. One of the core value props is not just lower cost, but it's that agility that it gives you by breaking things apart and helping you to match the technology with this newfound culture of speed. The two really need to be linked together. So to transform, we've learned a couple things, maybe more than a couple things, as we've been on this path to transformation with Amazon and helping out thousands and thousands of customers. The first thing that we looked at was to really gain technical flexibility and speed are a couple of critical elements. The first is the way you organize. We talked about organization being a really important element of transformation. It's the way that you put things together so that you can adopt these agile processes and really be able to invest in your most strategic capabilities. A lot of that means that you're going to be looking at moving to the cloud and also looking at your data strategy, because the data that you use is fuel for artificial intelligence, comes out of IoT, comes out of some of these really transformational types of areas. So let's first look at an organizational one that I love, which is building small teams. Now here at Amazon, we call that the two pizza team. And this is really about having a team that's big enough to where you can only eat 2 pizzas when you have a break. I guess if you have people that don't eat as much, you can even have more people on that team. But it's really interesting because what this does, these smaller teams fosters innovation, fosters ownership. You get to make decisions. You're a single-threaded team, so the decision-making comes to you. It's really like a small startup. You're decomposing the problem into its most simple roots so that you can solve that problem and you can really have a self-directed team structure. I think this is one of the most essential areas that I've loved about here my time at Amazon is the ability to take a small team and give them amazing challenges. In fact, this morning, one of the teams came to me, a small, actually 4-person team with a brilliant idea of how to drive that forward. I don't know if that would have happened in a 100-person or a 1,000-person team. Now, as you're looking at those teams, also look at the diversity of the team, because diversity does drive innovation. Now, I'm not just talking about man and woman as diversity. I'm talking about diversity of thought. In fact, we looked at a team once that wasn't innovating as fast as we wanted them to innovate. And so we were looking, they were like very diverse, gender diversity, racial diversity. But what we found was that they all graduated from the same school. And so they had the same methodology, same approach. It was really interesting. They weren't able to innovate as quickly. The data shows that if you are diverse in your team structure, that you're likely to grow your market share 45% faster. And the great thing is you're more likely to enter new markets. I love one of the stories about Doritos, where their diversity team got together and decided they wanted to impact the outcome of the business. And so they came up with a new flavor of Doritos that no one had even thought about, that turned out to be the #1 selling new flavor that particular year. So leverage diversity of thought in those team structures, and as well as that smaller team. Now, part of this area and flexibility as well involves the way then that you match the technology to some of these cultural changes, having a smaller team, having a diverse team. What we've seen from thousands of customers is the stage of adoption of that new technology. You know, microservices, making sure that you're broken apart into those smaller segments so that you can have that fast technology as well. So what we've seen is that the cloud native company, they're not starting with anything really that they have to link into. It's for all of us enterprises that have to reach back and bring along some of that legacy with us where the challenges really get tough. And so what we've seen in terms of those movements is maybe starting out with developing new apps, using that in the cloud, maybe using Linux if you're a Windows shop, to really get started and trying out, learning about those cloud-based patterns. And then we see, how do you pull this together, and how are you making this more transformational or foundational so that you can then build to that next step? A lot of this foundational area involves education and how you move the ball forward, with making sure that you're inclusive of your entire technology team and beyond. And then we see a lot of companies migrating some of those applications, those Windows applications over Oracle, SAP, and the list goes on. Because those migration also brings some of that advantage that you had into the cloud market. You can still get access to that data and use it. You have those workflows that you've been baking upon. Maybe you refactor or maybe you just lift and shift, but that migration is an essential element. And then finally, you get to this transformational point where you're really doing all your new development and leveraging all of that legacy data that you have in the new transformational way. So if you think about your journey in terms of these stages, it can really help you plan that path. One of the sections that we'll do a little bit later involves the cloud economics team. And that cloud economics really helps you to figure out for you and your company how you progress in each of these stages and what are the benefits, not just costs, but also that agility that comes from moving to the cloud. Now, some of the best practices that you're going to hear about as you move to the cloud, I think can really benefit you. So one that we're going to talk about is the way that you educate your team, and we'll go in a little bit more detail on that. Also, setting up a cloud center of excellence where you have a place where people can go and learn that staffed by that cloud tiger team is really crucial. And of course, having that executive sponsorship. We see a lot of cloud business kind of come up from the ground up. But the most successful best practice we see is not only the ground up with those builders, those developers, but also having that executive support from the CIO, CTO, even from chief marketing officers and chief procurement officers. So as you're looking at your plans, make sure that you have an element of how you get that sponsorship that would be required to set up all these other areas. Now, a company that I think has done just a brilliant job at this is Capital One. And they recognized some years ago that for them to be really relevant like they are today, that they needed to turn themselves into a digital bank, have a strong data strategy that added real value to customers. But they knew if they were going to do that, they needed all of their tech on board. And so they set out on this goal over a year to really educate their entire team. No person was really left behind. And so they set up a way that they were training for awareness, a large group of people, and then doing that deep dive with that cloud tiger team. Their outcome was pretty amazing. They were very focused on that phased approach, and they were able to not only increase their innovation, their rate of innovation and their productivity, but they now have one of the best models for the modern IT career path as well, which gives them higher ability to keep their staff, which is so important as well. So I love this example of education because it really shows you that as you're doing transformation, it involves change, and that means you've got to bring the whole team along with you. So what you've just seen is kind of this cultures that you're moving from and cultures that you're moving to. You're moving from like the big teams over to teams that are manageable and can really focus and hone in on things. You're moving from some of the legacy over to the cloud-based structure, moving from monolithic to microservices and creating that ability to create containers and serverless areas as you're going. You're really making that big shift both with the culture as well as with the technology. The two go hand in hand like we talked about earlier. I've been talking to a lot of CIOs lately and just had a roundtable, and the CIOs who recognize that it's not just about the tech, but it's also about the culture are those that are so wildly successful. It requires both to really transform and really to get this movement to the cloud down into the right rate and pace. So let's move on to now our second core area of transformation, which is around creating this environment of innovation. So we've talked about the smaller teams, but now how do you get those teams to look at trying new ideas, not being afraid of risk? Testing, and then committing the investment so that they know what's really important. Alignment around not just the tech, but the business goal too. in one of these roundtables, I loved it because everybody was going around and introducing themselves. And one of the CIOs said, he didn't say, I'm the CIO of X company. He said, I am the business leader who focuses on tech. I just thought, wow, what a great mind shift. And then, of course, just removing some of the impediments that you have, everybody has in their environment, to driving that innovation. Now, I told you earlier that I have 2 daughters, and every Sunday morning we make pancakes. And so one day my daughters brought me this picture of a pancake from Pinterest. And they said, Mom, we want this particular pancake. And I looked at it. It doesn't look that hard, right? I was like, I can do that. So I decided to experiment. And boom, this is what my pancake looked like. Don't laugh too hard. But I did not really experiment enough ahead of time. I didn't recognize that I needed that perfectly round pancake in order to make this look great. But I learned and I tried and I got better and better. And that's what part of this area is really about. It's about how do you experiment, not be afraid of failure, but embrace it and learn and then continue to move forward. One of the things I love about working at Amazon is that we have different ways to get this innovation going other than just doing pancakes. For example, one of the things that we do in our digital innovation workshop is we have cards, and we pass those cards around to companies, and we ask them to innovate differently. So we say, what if you were Amazon and you had all of the processes set up like Amazon does? How would you innovate differently? What would you do? Or what if you were Harry Potter and you could say, magically, this is what I want to give to the customer? What would that be? Or if you're a student and you have enough for a burger and 2 beers, so you don't have a lot of money, how would you spend it if you only had that much money? It's just a great way to think differently about a problem and to approach it in a different way. As you're looking at these problems too, you really need to think about the data that you're bringing to the table, because the data that you bring will be the output that you get as well. And I love this particular story because these researchers worked with 40 million lines of text from romance novels, and they wanted to train a machine learning model. And so, again, only having data that was romance novels, they wanted to see what the computer, what the artificial intelligence system would come out with by only training it with romance novels. And so you're going to see that this is quite interesting. So it generated a story about the image that was very different than what was really happening. Talk about a shirtless man and providing a small kiss, which wasn't happening at all. So one of the things that we always like to instruct is that the data that goes in, that data is so essential, because what goes in is what's going to come out. And you could get wrong decisions if you have data that has some sort of unconscious bias in it or isn't the right or correct data. So as you're looking at this transformation, you need to look at the data that you have as well. And I know we'll get into a little bit more of that when we focus in on artificial intelligence in our later session. But I think that's a very poignant point that we all need to take away as we're moving forward. So part of this too is giving people freedom to innovate. And I love this particular quote because in order to have freedom to innovate, you need to be able to have the ability to fail. I love the fact that in some of our meetings at Amazon, we actually celebrate a failure based on what we learned from it. So we're not really celebrating the fact that we made a mistake, but we're celebrating the learnings because it makes us better and better. If you think about Amazon, with the phone, it led us to more and powerful marketplaces. Because we failed, we learned, and because we learned, we were successful in other areas. So if you give your teams that ability to innovate, but have it be okay if they fail. We do these connection questions every day from employees, and one of the questions that we always ask is, have you failed on a project? And what did you learn from that? So we're encouraging people to take that risk and to be able to have that failure because they pushed the limit. They were bold as they were moving forward. Now, our third area, which is also really crucial, in fact, our CEO, Andy Jassy, says security and compliance is actually priority 0 because there is nothing higher than that. Today, privacy and the way that consumers and B2B companies are looking at that has really changed. It's now actually higher on the agenda. They're not willing to sacrifice their privacy, their security for a more convenient way to do something. That, again, is part of that fluctuation of what customers are looking for. And so here, I think it's really important to look at the way that security is being driven. Security should be every engineer's job. Setting up some guidelines for compliance is going to be important. Having a team that does best practices, but building security in from the very beginning and ensuring that transparency is going to be crucial, not just for your technology, but also for your brand. We've been seeing lots of companies that have been impacted by not really paying attention here. And we know that the cloud brings so much to the table in terms of helping with that security and compliance. So if you really think about it, having every engineer own the security is really critical. Having it built in from the very beginning and ensuring that it's not an afterthought, but it's something that is built in from the beginning. We all know that it's harder to go back and add that security in versus developing it from the beginning. For instance, for Amazon, we built our services to work with AZs and to be secure in that. We're not going back and retrofitting. It was designed and architected in that way. And that's the way you need to think about what you're doing and your services as well. We recommend that you build up a security working group, and that security working group can help define best practices for security and compliance, not just in the cloud, but on premises and the cloud, as we believe those practices should be the same. And in fact, a little bit later, you'll hear a session about VMware Cloud on AWS and how we help you to automate some of those best practices. But again, you need to come up with those best practices for how you want to drive security in your business, both in the cloud as well as on premises. One of my favorite stories and favorite companies that has done this so well is GE. And this is GE and their oil and gas. And I love this because it really brings together several of the points that we've been talking about today. They did some experiments with the cloud. They built some new applications. They were able to do some migrations. And then every step of the way, every journey, they built security in because security is so important for this particular business. And they didn't just say, let's do it all as a big bang. They planned it out as incremental experimentation and goals so that they could set forth what they wanted to accomplish, providing education as they went. But again, every element of this journey has security built in. They had a best practice security council for on-prem and in the cloud. And they were able to execute even stronger in the cloud, leveraging a lot of the best practices and the tools like CloudWatch, for instance, that Amazon Web Services brings to the table. So now, if you think about what we've covered, we've talked about, having this ability to respond to amazing opportunities, removing some of those barriers to innovation while keeping those things that make us as an enterprise really valuable. That permissions, that customer data, those business processes, and that financial backing that we have. If you add that together with that secure environment, that can really help lead us into this transformational era. And one of the companies that I think really exemplifies this really well is a company called Just Eat. Now, some of you may or may not know them. They are an amazing $5 billion startup, as they like to call themselves. And their mission is to deliver food. They started in Europe, and they've been expanding. I think they've now come to Canada and soon maybe will coming here to the United States. But what I love about their story is that they have so many customers and so many restaurants, and their growth has been extreme. But while they've done that, they've really been transforming themselves. So they're not waiting for someone else to transform and disrupt them. They've been transforming themselves. And so one of the things that they were looking at is that data that was sitting in SQL databases. Dave, their CIO, migrated all that SQL Server from Microsoft over to the AWS Cloud. And so they were able now to get access to that data, and they recognized a new trend, which is voice, right? Everybody knows about Alexa and how we use voice. So they were really interested in, can they innovate with voice, but leveraging their strengths, some of that data and information that comes from those old legacy databases. So they've partnered up with Alexa, and now you can say, Alexa, I want a pizza. And Alexa will come back and say, your pizza will be delivered in 45 minutes, knowing what pizza place you want. Or they may know that I'm impatient, so I can't wait an hour. So if I order, Alexa, send me sushi, they'll know that the sushi is going to take more than an hour. And so they'll say, Sandy, we know that that's going to take more than an hour. Could we recommend Tex-Mex today? I love the way that they've done this with focus groups, with tech forums, coupling together the business side with the tech side. Again, not thinking of themselves just as IT, but as that enterprise information, innovation, transformation that's really helped them go a long way. And they're even doing more now. They're integrating in with Amazon Fire to do group ordering. So they take an idea and they're expanding it, understanding how the market is working. And some of the ways that they do that, I think, are really smart as a part of their strategy. They have a UX lab to make sure they have the best customer experience. They partner with marketing to get the best research. They partner with their customers and their employees. They do these amazing hackathons to come up with new ideas. They're leveraging the cloud to do internal betas, and they have some amazing partnerships. I love the fact, too, that they're sharing all their great ideas. They have this techjusteat.com, and they share how they're innovating. They're very open. They're an open API, if you would, on sharing the way that they are innovating and that they're doing this disruption, all driven by the AWS Cloud, but also their culture that is just amazingly innovative. So now if you think about Amazon also is innovative. And one of the things that we tend to focus on is that speed that we go at and the way that we do that maniacal focus. In fact, Jeff Bezos, our CEO, says, we've really had 3 big ideas at Amazon. One is to put the customer first, customer obsession, and secondly, invent. We have a whole company of builders, and be patient. And patience means that you're going to wait for that success. You're going to learn from that failure. And then as you learn, you're going to get stronger and better at what you do. Now, because of this great leadership and the great innovative culture that we have, we've come up with these leadership principles. And one of the things I love about it is that it's not just for the management team. Everybody in Amazon is a leader, and we're all on a mission. We have these small teams that we talked about. We accept failure, and we learned from it. So you can see we've set out these leadership principles that I thought when I was interviewing, everybody said, learn the principles, learn the principles. So I did. I thought, I'm going to forget about them once I leave my interview. But they live it here. We live it here. I get asked all the time, about how I can simplify this idea, or can I do a deep dive, or will I disagree and commit? So Amazon doesn't just have them written on a sheet of paper. We live it every single day. So I wanted to share 3 of those today that I think best fit our mission today, which is to help you figure out how you're going to transform and disrupt in your particular industry. And I wanted to start with the very first one, which Jeff talked about, customer obsession. Now, customer obsession is clearly one of the places that I see Amazon differentiating itself. I've worked for lots of other companies. I gave you a little bit of my background. But I think what Amazon does is truly obsess. They're not customer focused. They don't take some customer insight. We truly obsess about the customers. Every leader, and that's every employee, starts with the customer and work backwards. I can remember my very first narrative that I wrote for Amazon. I talked to 140 customers. That was just myself. That wasn't my team or the research that I looked at, so that I really understood what the problem was. I also worked hard to earn the trust of my customers. And that means, doing things like reducing prices 60 plus times like Amazon does. And while we do pay attention to our competitors, I think it's really important to note that we obsess over our customers. We're more focused on what they're doing than what our competitors are doing. We're not a, imitate and follow. We are a lead based on what the customer is telling us that they need and that they want in the marketplace. So if you think about this, the way we do this is we write a press release. Now, this sounds crazy, right? Every other company, you first develop the service or the offering, and then you write the press release. But at Amazon, we write the press release first. We nail the value prop. We even use quotes in there from customers that we've been talking to. This really helps us to frame what we're going to build before we actually build it. A lot of companies that I've worked for, they're so focused on the technology that they build something in the technology and then they figure out what it's going to be used for. At Amazon, we work so hard at working backwards from the customer. We write that press release first. But it doesn't stop there. From the press release, then we actually write a frequently asked questions, or an FAQ. Now, these are questions like, what are you going to build? What are you going to take to market? How are you going to take it to market? But we get into some really tough questions. We want to know what our customers are going to be most excited about in one sentence. Not everything, one sentence. What are they going to be most disappointed about? And then we debate, do we release it later so that we don't disappoint the customers on these two things? Or is it more important to get it out there and experiment with it? It's really a powerful exercise to write this set of frequently asked questions before you even start building anything. And then we start to look at the user interaction and the UX. And this was really interesting because we just released a product at Reinvent. And that product was AWS License Manager. We spent so much time defining the user interface, making sure it was easy for you, our customers, to use and leverage. Even Andy, our CEO, wanted to see the UX because we know that customer experience is so important. And then we start building. So then my engineering team started building once we had all that done. And that's almost opposite of a lot of other companies that build it, and then they do the user design, and then they do the frequently asked questions, and finally they do the PR. This really makes you think and innovate in a far different way. And part of the reason it's different is because of the questions that we answer. We're not surface level. We want to know who the customer is, but not just customers as company. We want to know the person and the company that we're trying to solve for. Is it an IT manager? Is it a system admin? Is it a DBA? We really want to understand who that customer is. We then want to understand what is the problem that we're trying to solve, because a lot of times we're working with new innovations, so maybe it's a problem. You can't tell us exactly how to solve it, but based on the problem, we can figure out a way. We want to know what's the most important customer benefit, not the 5 most important or the 3 most important, but what's the number one. And we also want to know how we know that that's what the customers need. So we're looking for unconscious bias here. So maybe you have a group of people who are doing the research all from one company or who don't use this particular feature a lot. We want to make sure that when we understand the customer, we really know what they're looking for. And then finally, of course, that customer experience that I talked about as well. That is so crucial and critically important, designing the UI in the right path and the right way. A company who's done this is Electronic Caregiver. They have been studying how to care for the aging or the disabled for quite some time. They started back in 2012 doing studies and watching how people walk and what the gait was, to where they then, once they wrote that PR and had that frequently asked questions, they were able to design it. They looked at all different types of interfaces and decided that using augmented reality and a device that would be helpful at the home itself would be the best way to go to market. So now they have a personalized, monitored medication reminder that was built, again, working backwards from the customer to deliver the right particular solution in this particular market. I loved how they really put themselves in the spirit of the customer, had that empathy. You know, innovation is all about empathy, and they really did a nice job working backwards from the customer to deliver something that's incredibly important, a healthcare system. So as we look at that, you know, working backwards from the customer, there are two other leadership principles that I want to talk about. One in the center is bias for action. And I like this because, you know, speed matters when you're making decisions. Don't you hate it when you want someone to make a decision and they're just taking too long? But you've got to make the decision in the right way with the right set of collaboration. And I do think that Amazon has another really great best practice in this area, one that was probably the hardest for me to learn. And that is around deciding when to move really fast with your decision and when to slow down a little bit. So, you know, most other companies I've worked for, every decision is either really rapid or every decision is very collaborative and takes a lot of time. But in Amazon, we view two types of decisions. One is a two-way door, so I can make a decision, but if I make the wrong decision, I can quickly change that. Maybe putting blue on my website, I can quickly change that to green if that's the better color that customers like. But if I'm making a decision, let's say about an API, that's a one-way door, because once I get that out there and everybody using it, changing it will be quite hard. And so throughout the day, I'm making one-way door decisions and two-way door decisions. So sometimes I'm very thoughtful, looking at lots of data, and others, I'm still looking at data, but I'm moving rapidly because I know I can change that decision. This is one of the areas that I think, again, was the hardest for me to learn, but also one of the most impactful in transformation. One of our customers, led by Bridget Fry, who is the CTO of Redfin. Redfin is a company based in Seattle that is disrupting the way the real estate market sells and markets houses, told me about one of her decisions that started out being something they thought could be a two-way door, and that was using machine learning to do an estimate for a house. So they had, studied, they'd gotten all this data about how to estimate for a house, but as they started thinking about it, they said, this isn't a two-way decision, because if one day I tell you your house is worth $1 million, and then the next day I tell you it's worth $200,000, I will have lost that trust that I have with the customer. And so they backed up, and they not only had data scientists, they brought in real estate agents and others who participated in the way that the estimate was done. They used AWS to drive those compute statements. In fact, she was telling me that without AWS, they probably wouldn't be able to afford to do this. And now they have one of the most successful and accurate estimators, within 3% of what houses are actually sold for, because they backed up and they said, this is not a two-way door, it's a one-way door. Let's really be thoughtful about it. And put out something that's most accurate, maybe not first to market, but that's the most accurate in the industry, and that's what they did as well. Our final leadership principle I want to talk about is disagree and commit. And I love this one too for disruption, because what it does is it says, you're going to debate, you're going to be passionate about your field, but you're going to debate a question, and sometimes you're not going to agree with the decision, but you're going to go ahead and support it because it's important to the company. So you'll debate it with passion and fire, but you'll go ahead and support that decision. I love this example from Buda Jones. I don't know if you guys know Buda Jones, but they do a lot of video rendering. And one of the stories I love was that the CEO had an opportunity to do the rendering for Wonder Woman, Wonder Woman, which is pretty powerful. And so as they were looking at it, in order to win the deal, they needed to really cut the amount of time it took them to render that video. And so they debated and they debated, and they took this journey on, and they actually got the amount of time to render down from 1,000 days to 4 days. Not just with their culture, and not just with looking at one-way doors and two-way doors, looking at technology. So they use jigsaw rendering, like a non-uniform rendering versus what they would normally do, but really debating it as a leadership team. Can we commit to this, and can we really deliver it? And they did. 1,000 days down to 4 days for the delivery of rendering Wonder Woman. So if you think about these three areas, customer obsession, bias for action, and that disagree and commit, these are really part of the elements that support this innovation culture that Amazon has built. What I'd like to challenge you to do is to figure out which of these three relate to you. Which of these three will impact your business, and how are you going to execute on those? Part of my startup before coming to Amazon was helping companies figure out innovation techniques and how they could adapt that to their culture. In some cases, they needed to change their culture. In some cases, needing to adopt the practice or the tactical to their company. And so that's what I would challenge you as you're sitting through this today, is to figure out which of these will be actionable for you and which you can adapt for the way that you do business. And of course, we do believe that all of these need the cloud behind them so that you can have technology to support that innovation journey. So let's look at a couple of examples that are not just Amazon. I've tried to throw in a couple as we've gone, like Just Eat and Capital One, but let's look at a couple of others that have adapted these to their style and their culture and are very successful in the way that they do that as well. So let's look at 20th Century Fox. And if you think about 20th Century Fox, for the longest time, they took a video and they would fly that video in, or they would ship it in, or they would have someone hand carry it in. Well, in the world of today's cloud, that's just not disruptive or transformational. That's old school. And so they now upload all of their videos, do their live streaming, all in the AWS Cloud. Again, looking at a culture transformation as well as a technology transformation, adopting some of these principles to the way that they do business and the way that they conduct themselves in the marketplace. Another example is around the way we look at 360 Fashion. Now, 360 Fashion is a small startup company, but they've also learned from Amazon, working backwards from the customer. So the founder, Anina Nat, first and originally created clothing that, as you moved, had IoT sensors in it, and it would change color. You could tweet to it, and it would change color, or be connected up to your heartbeat and change color as your heart was beating. Pretty cool things. But as she started really looking backwards from the customer, she found that those are fun things, but maybe not the most valuable thing from IoT-based clothing. And so now what she's got, and she just presented at our reInvent conference, is a jacket that has mood triggers on it so that you can push on these mood buttons at certain times of the day. So think about a hospital with their employees or a hotel. Now managers can know, wow, every day at 2 o'clock my team is really stressed. What can I do to reduce that stress for them? She's also produced things like IoT-based rings that you can press on with that IoT linkage back to the AWS backend where you can get help if someone is attacking you. And so she's really been looking backwards, learning from AWS on how we do that to really understand what's going to sell. Very important for a pivot for a startup. I've told you the story of Capital One. I just think they are such an amazing example on so many levels. Becoming a digital bank required a change in the way that they approach their customers, the way that they approach technology, the way they made decisions, one-way doors, two-way doors, to really capitalize on their use of the cloud. And I think everyone would say that the way that they have transformed themselves is leading edge in the financial services space. And then, of course, we've got, again, another startup like Skin Vision. Skin Vision was really interested in using a cell phone to identify maybe a mole that had cancerous cells in it. But they figured out that they had to work backwards from the customer, which was also the FDA. And so they were able to work backwards from the FDA to get that certification, again, leveraging that bias for action that enabled them to do that as one of the first startup companies in healthcare to gain that certification. And then, of course, Pinterest. Last but not least, of course, a company that has been growing and actually disrupted the market and then redisrupted it itself using a lot of these techniques of working backwards from the customer, but also having that bias for action and having the right culture set up with the right technology. The point about these companies is just to show you that these techniques don't just work for Amazon. They work for startups, for medium-sized companies, and for large enterprises. They're very powerful if you can figure out how to apply both the organizational principles of culture as well as the technology with the cloud to them. And in fact, you can create for yourself, working backwards from what you're looking at, a way that you can start that journey. Looking at your customer's journey map, figuring out how you want to position your teams. What size teams do you want? Do you have an experiment that you can start with? A lot of companies will start with this process in a particular area of their company and then drive that through to larger change. So make sure that you're taking a look at a lot of the examples that we're going through today with cloud economics, using the technology like VMware Cloud or Intel, or using artificial intelligence that requires a big culture change plus great data. Make sure that you're looking through these examples as ways that you can take and make action for yourself. So what's your next steps? Well, what I would highly recommend is that you look at your existing processes and those cultural experiences that you have and figure out what's the right way for you guys to start that journey. Can I do a two-pizza team? Can I do that as an experiment? Can I put a definition of one-way doors, two-way doors? Can I start small with the cloud? Can I start maybe doing some of that education? And then on the right-hand side with that infrastructure, how do you use that cloud as an enabler? What are the elements that you need in order to get started today? Will you do a migration, a lift and shift to get some of that, maybe that Oracle database or that Microsoft SQL Service database over to the cloud so that you can start playing? Or will you start with your first innovation Linux-based new app over there to get moving and grooving in driving that transformation for the business? Whatever your first step, make sure you take a first step because it's really important that you get started and that you experiment. It won't be perfect, but you're going to learn from it and then move forward. So we have a lot of great ways for you to get started today. Our really important area is that you get started on something. You move forward and you get going. I know a couple of customers that I've talked to, they spend a lot of time analyzing it. I would say don't analyze. Pick something from today's day and just get going. Again, my name is Sandy Carter. I'd love to have you get going today with this virtual transformation day so that you can have an impact on your company. Thank you.